Welcome to this educational presentation entitled Government Benefits for Residents of Senior Living Communities. My name is Thomas Day, and I have been asked to explain to aging seniors and their family members and other supporters how various government benefits apply to their particular current living situation. Over this time that we are going to be together, I will give you some important insights. I will introduce you to how Medicare covers nursing home services, home care services, and hospice. I will also explain to you how Medicaid works and how it is possible to plan in advance to preserve assets from Medicaid spend down. Now let me tell you a little bit about me. I have been working with seniors and their family members and other supporters for over 30 years. I have a great deal of knowledge and experience about the issues facing aging seniors. I am also an educator and writer and have produced 5 popular textbooks on long-term care issues and veterans benefits. Please note that if you have any questions or need advice on any of the information in this presentation, I will give you instructions at the end on how to receive assistance. In addition to the support that you're entitled to receive by attending this educational presentation, you also have access to a printed workbook containing all of the slides that I will present here. The workbook is important to help you review everything that is discussed. Also, you may have the option of pausing this video presentation and reviewing a particular slide. Here is a list of the topics that I'm going to discuss. First on the list is benefits available under Medicare health care coverage for nursing home costs, home health coverage, and hospice coverage. Next, I will discuss Medicaid and how it affects the income and assets of seniors who need Medicaid assistance. There seems to be a misconception among most people that Medicaid will basically wipe out savings, investments, and reduce the healthy spouses of Medicaid recipients to a poverty level. This is not necessarily true. Planning can be done to avoid the devastation of Medicaid asset rules and income rules. From this list, you see that I will discuss at least 3 strategies that can be used to maintain savings and other assets from Medicaid spend down if this planning is done in a reasonable number of years in advance of needing Medicaid. You can either review this slide on your workbook, or you may have the option of pausing this video presentation and reviewing this slide. Medicare was created as a result of federal legislation in 1965 that provides universal health care to all eligible individuals who paid into the system. Medicare is funded by a payroll tax levied on all working Americans. Nowadays, many older Americans decry the idea of the United States introducing socialized medicine. But Medicare is socialized medicine, plain and simple. Most older Americans seem to like it, but don't realize that it is a government-provided, universal, single-payer health care for all those who are eligible. Medicare is available for those who are eligible for Social Security and who have turned age 65. Medicare is also available for individuals younger than age 65 who are receiving Social Security disability. Medicare was never intended to cover long-term care services. However, it does provide some limited support for those services. In particular, Medicare will cover the first 20 days of cost in a skilled nursing facility at 100%. Medicare will only partially cover the next 80 days of the cost of a skilled nursing facility. The Medicare recipient must pay a large out-of-pocket coinsurance, and Medicare pays the balance. You see here the coinsurance for the current year. For those individuals who buy Medicare supplement insurance, and depending on the plan, the supplement insurance will often partially or fully pay for the out-of-pocket coinsurance for the remaining 80 days in a nursing home stay. For those seniors who are receiving their Medicare coverage through what is called a Medicare Advantage plan, Nursing home coverage depends on the plan. As a general rule, I have found that Medicare Advantage plans generally involve more out-of-pocket cost for nursing home coverage than original Medicare, along with a coverage supplement insurance plan. It must be remembered, however, that Medicare with or without supplemental insurance does not automatically cover 100 days of nursing home stays. The nursing home must submit a plan of care to Medicare, and Medicare will base its coverage on that plan of care. Once Medicare has decided that nursing home coverage is no longer needed, it will not pay any additional cost for the nursing home, even if the person needs to stay in that nursing home or transfer to the long-term care wing of that nursing home. Sometimes Medicare will only cover 3 or 4 days of nursing home coverage. In order to receive Medicare nursing home coverage, the patient must have spent at least 3 full days in a hospital and must have a skilled nursing need, and a doctor must order the care. There is generally no other way to get Medicare to cover the cost of a nursing home. Prior to 1997, Medicare used to cover home health care costs almost indefinitely. For example, my mother received Medicare home health care for a medical condition that she had, and that included a home health aide who came in 5 days a week and bathed and attended to her other personal needs. We took care of her in our home for 5 years. She had received these services for those 5 years on a daily basis except on weekends. In November 1997, we were informed that she no longer qualified for this benefit. Medicare had changed the rules, and if a recipient of home health services after that was not improving or had recovered, home health services would be terminated. You see on this slide that home health services currently from Medicare are authorized typically on a 60-day time frame. After the 60 days, the patient's needs are reassessed, and if more health care is needed, another 60 days is granted. Otherwise, the services are terminated. I have found that Medicare Advantage plans cover home health differently from original Medicare. Some of these plans do not cover home health as adequately as traditional or original Medicare would, as there could be copays or other out-of-pocket costs associated with home health services under a Medicare Advantage plan. When my mother, whom we cared for in our home for 5 years, became terminal, Medicare Hospice took over. This was prescribed by her attending physician. They would send a nurse or a home health aide or a social worker just about every day to check on her condition. They also provided nutritional support and any other medical support for her particular condition. She still received coverage for other medical needs under Medicare, but we had to sign an agreement that she would waive all Medicare coverage for the particular condition for which she was receiving hospice. She died in our home with family around her. Hospice has told us not to call an ambulance when she died, as they advised us that death in a hospital emergency room was not particularly a desirable event for family members. Her death at home was peaceful and in some respects spiritual. Hospice told us that they would take care of everything after her death, and they did, including removing her body to the mortuary. They also provided us with bereavement counseling and any other social support that we needed to deal with the death. Medicare has no out-of-pocket copays or deductibles for hospice provided in the home. A home would also be considered a senior living community as well. Medicaid was established as Title 19 of the 1965 Amendment to the Social Security Act, while Medicare was established at the same time as Title 18 of the Act. Medicaid is a health insurance program for certain low-income people. These include certain low-income families with children, aged people age 65 and older, people who are blind or disabled and on supplemental security income, and certain low-income pregnant women and children, and also covers people who have very high medical bills. Medicaid is funded and administered through a state-federal partnership. Funds for Medicaid are provided jointly by the federal government and the states. On average, the federal government provides about 57% of Medicaid funds, and the states provide the other 43%. However, there is a formula for states who are considered high income per capita, where those states put in more money, and states with low income per capita put in less money. Although there are broad federal rules for Medicaid, states have flexibility to design their own programs. Individual states also have authority to establish eligibility standards, determine what benefits and services to cover, and to set payment rates. For seniors needing long-term care, all states must cover skilled nursing and home health care services and doctor's services. An individual needing age 65 long-term care must go through an evaluation with a state Medicaid assessment specialist in order to determine a need for care. If the individual fails to meet the minimum level of care needed to qualify for that state's Medicaid coverage, then no Medicaid help is forthcoming. Medical eligibility for home and community-based services covered by Medicaid in some states could be based on different criteria from those for nursing homes. There is both an income and an asset test to qualify for Medicaid long-term care services. In general, these tests are applied for nursing home services, but these same tests may also be used to qualify individuals for home or community-based Medicaid services as well. In some states, the financial requirements for community-based services may be more stringent than those for nursing homes, or in some states they may be less stringent. Some states allow the so-called medically needy, those with large medical or long-term care costs or bills to pay, to deduct those costs from their gross income to reach the required income level and participate in Medicaid. This medically needy program is optional for states. However, there is a growing list of states, plus the District of Columbia, who do not have medically needy programs. These states have an income test for Medicaid. If the applicant has an income above the limit established by the state, there is no Medicaid eligibility. On the other hand, these income tests are in conflict with federal Medicaid rules that states cannot generally exclude Medicaid coverage from any person. As a result, federal rules allow individuals in states with an income test to meet an alternative eligibility for Medicaid by establishing an income qualifying trust, commonly called a Miller Trust. You can look at your workbook or pause the presentation here if your viewing mode allows it in order to see the current income and asset tests for Medicaid. I will now discuss in more detail how the income and asset tests that are often unique to each state are applied generally across the board. In most states, when someone is anticipating the need for Medicaid assistance for long-term care, the Medicaid department will take a snapshot of the resources of the potential applicant. Resources are defined as all household assets and other property that can be converted to cash belonging to both the potential applicant and his or her spouse. In most states, a personal residence is not considered part of the resources, and in most of these states is exempt under certain rules defined by that state. On the other hand, when the Medicaid recipient dies, and if the house is not occupied by a surviving spouse, in most states, Medicaid will generally put a lien against the property so that it cannot be sold until the debt to Medicaid has been paid off. Going back to this snapshot, the snapshot will freeze the value of those resources for application purposes, even though an application might not be submitted at that point. Medicaid allows couples to split up their resources so that the spouse who does not need Medicaid is allowed to keep a certain amount of the resources. In certain states, called 50% states, the spouse not needing Medicaid, who is generally called the community spouse, can keep up to half of the amount of resources not to exceed the limit that you see on this slide for this current year. In all states, if the value of the resources is below a certain limit, say $25,000 as an example, the community spouse gets to keep all of those resources, and the Medicaid spouse basically keeps only $2,000 or whatever that state uses for its minimum resource amount. In the remaining states, called 100% states, the healthy spouses can keep all of the household resources up to a limit determined by the state not to exceed the maximum resource limit which you see on this slide. In both 50% and 100% states, the balance of the resources belong to the nursing home spouse or the spouse receiving community services under Medicaid, and they must be spent down to below $2,000 or whatever the minimum asset limit is for that state in order for Medicaid to take over payments. As of this date, 34 states and the District of Columbia are 50% states, and 17 states are 100% states. I have already mentioned in a previous slide how the income test can be met in certain states. If there is a couple, the Medicaid spouse must count his or her income towards the income test, but the community spouse gets to keep his or her income and not have to count that towards the income test. In all states, once a Medicaid recipient is eligible, and if that recipient has a spouse, the state will provide the community spouse with a certain amount of income in order to not impoverish that person. This is called the Monthly Minimum Needs Allowance, or MMNA. If the minimum needs allowance of the community spouse is a greater amount than the actual income of that spouse, Medicaid will take income from the spouse receiving Medicaid and give it to the community spouse to meet the minimum needs. Under certain conditions, additional expenses of the community spouse, such as taxes, utilities, and so forth, allow for a higher minimum needs allowance, and in some states this could be well over $3,000 a month. I am not going to read to you the rules that you see here. I would have nothing more to add. Refer to your workbook or pause the presentation if you can to read this slide in more detail. Just be aware that there are penalties for transferring resources prior to or during Medicaid eligibility, and the penalties for doing this are quite severe. Please be aware that I'm not personally offering you any planning strategies, as I am not authorized to do so. I am simply listing some of the strategies that are currently being used by individuals who are authorized to help you with Medicaid planning. It is important to understand that if someone is anticipating the need for Medicaid at some future date but does not need it right now, some planning can be done to protect assets from the Medicaid spend-down rules. These rules require the Medicaid applicant to spend down all of his or her allotted resources, usually to below $2,000, before Medicaid will cover the cost of long-term care. For example, if someone has $250,000 and needs nursing home care, that person would have to spend $248,000 of those resources before Medicaid would cover the cost of a nursing home. Of course, all of you have heard of these impoverishment rules, and any one of you who have any assets at all live in fear of ever needing to reside in a nursing home very long, as most of those assets would be dissipated before Medicaid would take over paying the cost. Fortunately, some planning can be done years in advance to insulate assets from this Medicaid spend-down requirement. For example, if assets are gifted in the form of a trust or an outright gift, and 60 months or more have expired before the Medicaid application, those assets are free of any penalty from Medicaid. There are some other strategies that are used to protect assets that I will discuss in the next 3 slides. However, these next 3 slides are very complex, and I am only including them as examples of the kind of planning that can be done. I'm not going to take the time to go into detail or verbally explain how the various strategies were used and why they work. You can stop the presentation if possible, or refer to your workbook if you want to study them in more detail. Any planning that you do in advance should be done with someone who understands Medicaid and can help you with this planning. In some states, only attorneys can do this type of planning. Please be aware that all of the ideas that I discuss here do not represent any legal advice from me. Do not do any planning based on the information I am giving you here. I am not authorized to provide this sort of planning, and I am only illustrating on the next 3 slides some of the strategies that are typically used for Medicaid planning. You should not do it on your own. If you need assistance with planning for Medicaid, we can help you find someone to provide that assistance. At the end of this presentation, I provide instructions on how to request this assistance. The strategy on this slide illustrates the use of Medicaid funeral trusts to preserve assets from Medicaid spend down. On the left is a scenario with no planning, where Mary and John have $48,000 in assets. John is in a nursing home and has to go through spend down and then dies, and his funeral and burial costs are $11,000. Without planning, Mary is only left with $19,000 for her own use. Using Medicaid funeral trusts, Mary gets to preserve $30,000 of their assets for her own use, as well as for burial and funeral costs. You can pause the slide here if you can, or refer to your workbook to understand this planning strategy in more detail. This idea uses a strategy to gift assets many years in advance of needing Medicaid. The idea is to wait out the 60-month exclusion period for Medicaid gifting in order for the gift to not be subject to penalty. Even if an application is made for Medicaid within this 60-month exclusion zone, significant assets can still be saved from Medicaid spend down and from penalty by private paying for long-term care services through the end of the 60-month exclusion. This usually results in some assets being saved from spend down. Pause here if you can, or refer to your workbook. This idea is currently being used by Medicaid planners as a strategy to transfer the Medicaid recipient's resources to the community spouse through the use of an income annuity. This strategy is used for what is called Medicaid crisis planning, where an application for Medicaid is imminent and an attempt is made to save as much of the assets from spend down as possible. Pause here if you can, or refer to your workbook for more detail. Here are a few more potential ideas for preserving assets from Medicaid spend down and thus accelerating the point at which Medicaid takes over for paying for long-term care. It would take me way too long to describe each of these ideas in detail. Just be aware that they may or may not be available in your state. None of this information should be considered legal advice. It is only used for enlightenment as to what may or may not be done. You should always use a Medicaid planning expert to help you with any strategies pertaining to accelerating Medicaid payment. In some states, only an attorney can do this type of planning. Pause the presentation here if you can, or refer to your workbook for more detail. If you need any advice or assistance with any of the planning concepts or benefits discussed in this presentation, you should contact the sponsor of this presentation, and the sponsor can direct you to the right people. Contact information from the sponsor of this presentation is included on the workbook that you receive, or the sponsor may use other methods to allow you to make requests. Thank you for attending this presentation. I covered some pretty detailed information, and I sure appreciate that you hung in there with me. I hope it was rewarding for you, and I hope that you have received some valuable information that will help you retain assets or provide for additional benefits from the government.